My name is Iris Kingsley, 32 years old, and my entire life almost fell apart when my uncle declared that family business was only for real family at our Christmas dinner. The truth is, I've been secretly keeping the Kingsley construction empire afloat for years, and not a single person at that table knew I was their biggest investor. After spending my childhood being reminded I wasn't real Kingsley blood, Uncle Richard had the audacity to raise his glass and announce that only true heirs would ever lead the company. My adoptive cousins smirked across the table while Aunt Martha squeezed my hand under the tablecloth, her silent way of apologizing for her husband's cruelty. Richard thought I would accept it quietly like always, but this time he went too far. The consequences would reach far beyond what any of them could imagine. Before I continue my story, let me explain how we got here. I was adopted by the Kingsleys when I was 4, after my parents died in a car accident. My mother had been Richard's sister, but the family never quite embraced me as their own. Blood runs deeper than paperwork, Uncle Richard would say whenever I tried to participate in family traditions. I grew up watching my cousins, James, Tyler, and Veronica, being groomed to take over the family construction business while I was pushed to the sidelines. My achievements were footnotes, my ideas dismissed. When I graduated with honors in business and technology, Uncle Richard gave me a pat on the head and said, "That's nice, but it's not like you'll need it for the family business." What he didn't know was that I had been building my own fortune since college. My tech startup revolutionized architectural software, creating AI systems that could optimize construction projects and reduce costs by nearly 40%. By the time I was 28, I had sold my company for $850 million and started an investment firm. 3 years ago, I discovered through industry connections that Kingsley Construction was on the verge of bankruptcy. Poor management by my cousins had driven the company into massive debt. Without telling anyone, I created a shell corporation and became their anonymous angel investor, injecting $175 million to save the business my grandfather had built. I didn't do it for gratitude. I did it because despite everything, I still remembered Grandpa Joseph telling me stories about building his first house. The pride in his voice when he described creating something that would shelter generations. The company was his legacy, and I couldn't let it crumble because of pride and prejudice. For 3 years, I attended board meetings as Ms. K from Aurora Investments. My cousins never recognized me behind my professional demeanor and designer suits, so different from the little Iris they mocked at family gatherings. I watched them take credit for the company's miraculous turnaround while implementing my suggested strategies. The irony wasn't lost on me when Uncle Richard bragged about James's business genius at family dinners, unaware that his precious son was merely following my roadmap. I said nothing, bided my time, continued to build my own empire in the shadows. Until that Christmas dinner. I had just finalized the paperwork for another $200 million investment into Kingsley Construction, funds they desperately needed for an upcoming government contract. The deal would be announced in January, effectively making me the majority shareholder. When Uncle Richard clinked his glass and stood up at the head of the table, I expected the usual Christmas toast about family tradition and legacy. Instead, he launched into an announcement about the company's succession plan. As we close out another successful year at Kingsley Construction, it's time we discuss the future, he said, chest puffed with pride. The board and I have decided that leadership will transition to James next year, with Tyler heading operations and Veronica managing client relations. My cousins beamed while I maintained a neutral expression, sipping my wine. This company was built by Kingsley blood and will continue under Kingsley blood, he continued, his eyes briefly flicking toward me. Family business is for real family after all? The table fell silent. My aunt stared at her plate. Even James had the decency to look uncomfortable. A toast. Uncle Richard raised his glass higher, oblivious to the tension. To keeping Kingsley Construction in the hands of true Kingsleys for generations to come. Glasses clinked around the table. I raised mine with a smile that didn't reach my eyes. Little did my uncle know that by this time tomorrow, I would reveal exactly who had been keeping his precious legacy alive all these years. and then I would watch as his empire of lies came tumbling down around him. The rest of Christmas dinner passed in a blur of forced pleasantries and awkward conversation. I excused myself early, claiming a headache. Nobody seemed particularly bothered by my departure, except Aunt Martha, who followed me to the foyer. "Iris, sweetheart," she whispered, glancing back toward the dining room to ensure we were alone. "Richard doesn't mean half the things he says. You know how he gets after a few drinks." I smiled sadly at my aunt. She had always been kind to me, but her kindness came with whispers and apologies, never with the courage to stand up to her husband. "It's fine, Aunt Martha. I'm just tired." I kissed her cheek. "I'll see you at the company New Year's party next week." As I drove back to my penthouse apartment, memories flooded through my mind. I remembered being 10 years old, proudly showing Uncle Richard my school project, a bridge built from popsicle sticks that had won first prize in the science fair. "Engineering is in the Kingsley blood," my teacher had written on my report card. When I showed him, Uncle Richard had merely glanced at it and said, "Nice effort, Iris, but you've got to understand. You don't have Kingsley blood. It's sweet that you're trying, though." I remembered being 16, asking if I could intern at the company during summer break. "The internship program is for family members who will actually work here someday," James had said with a smirk, while Uncle Richard nodded in agreement. I remembered being 22, fresh out of college with my business degree, offering to help modernize their outdated systems. "Thanks, but we need someone who understands the Kingsley way of doing things," Uncle Richard had responded, before hiring an external consultant who implemented half the ideas I had suggested, for 10 times what it would have cost to let me do it. The pattern was clear. No matter what I achieved, I would never be real family. By the time I reached my apartment, my sadness had hardened into resolve. I poured myself a glass of whiskey, Grandpa Joseph's favorite, and walked to the floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city. Somewhere down there was the Kingsley Construction Headquarters, a building my grandfather had designed himself. I pulled out my phone and called my attorney, Simon Palmer. "It's Christmas, Iris," he answered, the sounds of family celebration in the background. "I know. I'm sorry. But I need you to prepare the paperwork we discussed. I'm pulling the trigger." There was a pause on the line. "Are you sure? Once this happens, there's no going back." "I'm sure," I replied, thinking of Uncle Richard's toast. "Execute everything first thing tomorrow. And Simon, I want to be present when you deliver the news." The next morning, I dressed with particular care, a tailored charcoal suit, pearl earrings that had belonged to my birth mother, and the red-soled heels I reserved for closing major deals. Today would be the biggest deal of my life, reclaiming my dignity. The Kingsley Construction Headquarters was nearly empty due to the holiday break, but I knew Uncle Richard would be there. He prided himself on working when others were resting, another Kingsley tradition he often reminded me I wouldn't understand. Simon met me in the lobby, briefcase in hand. "Everything's ready. The documents have been filed. As of 9 this morning, Aurora Investments has formally withdrawn all funding and called in its loans to Kingsley Construction, effective immediately." "And the identity revelation?" "The press release goes out in 1 hour, announcing that Iris Kingsley is the founder and CEO of Aurora Investments." My heart pounded as we rode the elevator to the executive floor. Uncle Richard's assistant wasn't at her desk, another holiday absence, so we walked straight to his office and knocked. "Come in," he called, sounding irritated at the interruption. He looked up from his desk, surprise registering on his face when he saw me. That surprise turned to confusion when he noticed Simon. "Iris? What's this about? And who is this?" "Uncle Richard, this is Simon Palmer, my attorney." I remained standing, declining his half-hearted gesture toward a chair. "We're here because there's something you should know about Aurora Investments." His brow furrowed. "Aurora Investments? The firm that's been funding our expansion? What about them?" "I founded Aurora Investments 5 years ago after selling my tech company," I said calmly, watching his expression shift from confusion to disbelief. "I'm the CEO. I'm Ms. K, and I've been keeping Kingsley Construction solvent for the past 3 years. Uncle Richard's face paled. That's not possible. Ms. K is me, I finished for him. I've attended every board meeting, approved every loan, and directed every strategic pivot that saved this company from bankruptcy after James and Tyler nearly ran it into the ground. He stood up abruptly. If this is some kind of joke— It's no joke, Simon interjected, opening his briefcase and placing a stack of documents on Richard's desk. These are the original investment agreements, all signed by Ms. Kingsley. And these, he added, placing another stack beside them, are the documents formally withdrawing all funding, effective immediately. Uncle Richard stared at the papers, then at me, his face cycling through shock, anger, and something I'd never seen before: fear. You can't do this, he whispered. The Miller government contract. We need that capital to fulfill the bid. Family business is for real family, I said, echoing his words from the night before. Isn't that right, Uncle Richard? For the first time in my life, Richard Kingsley had nothing to say. I didn't wait for Uncle Richard to compose himself. Instead, I turned to leave, but his voice stopped me at the door. Wait, he said, his tone somewhere between commanding and pleading. Iris, let's talk about this. There must be some misunderstanding. I turned back slowly. Misunderstanding? You've made yourself perfectly clear for 28 years, Uncle Richard. What part did I misunderstand? He gestured toward the chair across from his desk again, more insistently this time. Please sit down. Let's discuss this like adults. Simon gave me a questioning look. I nodded slightly and took the seat, crossing my legs and resting my hands in my lap. Simon remained standing behind me, a silent guardian. Iris, Uncle Richard began, running a hand through his silver hair. Business is complicated. Family is complicated. Sometimes things are said for the benefit of investors, for appearances. Save it, I interrupted. This isn't about what you said last night. This is about what you've been saying and doing my entire life. He had the decency to look uncomfortable. You're taking this too personally. The company has always operated on traditional values. Surely you understand. What I understand, I said, my voice steady despite the anger bubbling beneath, is that you were perfectly happy to take my money without knowing it was mine. You were happy to implement my strategies when you thought they came from a stranger. The only thing you couldn't accept was that they came from me. That's not fair, he protested weakly. Neither is telling a child she'll never belong because of blood. Neither is dismissing every accomplishment because it doesn't fit your narrative. I leaned forward. Do you know what Grandpa Joseph told me before he died? Uncle Richard stiffened. His father had always been a sensitive subject. He said, Iris, this company isn't about bricks and mortar. It's about building foundations for people to grow on. He never once made me feel like I wasn't part of that legacy. Dad was sentimental, Richard muttered. Business requires tough decisions. Like the decision to nearly bankrupt his company? I raised an eyebrow. Or the decision to let James approve that faulty materials supplier because he was a golf buddy? The one that cost you the Westfield project and nearly resulted in a lawsuit? His eyes widened. How did you— I know everything, Uncle Richard. Every mistake, every shortcut, every bad decision. I've been cleaning up after your precious heirs for 3 years while they took credit for saving the company. I shook my head. And after all that, you still had the audacity to say family business is only for real family. A knock at the door interrupted us. James appeared, his usually confident demeanor faltering when he saw me. Dad? The Miller contract team is on the line. They're asking about the financing confirmation we promised for today. Richard's face paled further. Tell them we're finalizing the details. James looked confused. But we already told them the funding was secured through Aurora. Ms. K signed off on it last week. Ms. K has had a change of heart, I said, rising from my chair. James looked between his father and me, confusion evident. What does Iris have to do with Aurora? Your cousin, Richard said, his voice strained, is Ms. K. James laughed, then stopped when no one joined him. That's ridiculous. Ms. K is that serious businesswoman with the Harvard MBA and the— He trailed off as he looked at me more carefully, really seeing me for perhaps the first time. Surprised, cousin? I smiled thinly. While you were taking credit for my strategies, I was building an investment portfolio worth more than Kingsley Construction's entire market value. James turned to his father. Dad, what's going on? Your father is learning that actions have consequences, Simon answered for him. Aurora Investments has withdrawn all funding from Kingsley Construction, effective immediately. What? James looked panicked. But the Miller contract? We'll need to find new backing, I finished for him. You can't do this. James stepped toward me, but Simon moved between us. She can and she has, Simon said calmly. All perfectly legal. In fact, the press release announcing Ms. Kingsley as the founder and CEO of Aurora Investments should be going out right about— He checked his watch. Now. As if on cue, Richard's phone began to ring. Then James's. Then the office line. The news was breaking. This will destroy us, Richard said quietly. No, I corrected him. This will force you to face reality. The company was already destroyed. I saved it. And now you'll have to find another savior, or learn to run it properly yourselves. I moved toward the door again, but this time James blocked my path. Why? He demanded. Why go through all this elaborate charade? Why not just tell us who you were from the beginning? I looked him directly in the eyes. Would you have listened? Would you have taken my advice? Or would you have dismissed me as not real family? Just like you've done my entire life. His silence was answer enough. That's what I thought, I said, stepping around him. Now, if you'll excuse me, I have my own family business to attend to. As Simon and I walked out of the office, I could hear phones continuing to ring behind us. By the time we reached the elevator, my own phone was buzzing incessantly with notifications. The news was spreading like wildfire through the business community. Are you okay? Simon asked as the elevator doors closed. I took a deep breath. I've never felt more okay in my life. For the first time since I was 4 years old, I felt like I was truly honoring my parents' memory. Both sets of them. I wasn't just the girl who wasn't real family anymore. I was Iris Kingsley, and I had built something of my own. By evening, my story had spread throughout the business world. My phone wouldn't stop ringing with calls from reporters, industry colleagues, and even competitors wanting to discuss potential partnerships. I silenced it and poured myself another glass of whiskey, this time in celebration rather than consolation. I hadn't expected the overwhelming support from the business community. Several prominent women CEOs had already reached out, praising my resilience and offering solidarity. The narrative was taking shape without my input. Adopted daughter proves her worth after years of family exclusion. Just after 8 p.m., my doorman called up. Ms. Kingsley, your aunt is here to see you. I hesitated, then told him to send her up. When I opened the door, Aunt Martha stood there looking smaller than I remembered, her eyes red from crying. May I come in? She asked quietly. I stepped aside, gesturing toward my living room with its panoramic city views. She sat perched on the edge of my sofa, clutching her purse like a life preserver. This is a beautiful home, Iris, she said, looking around. You've done well for yourself. Thank you, I replied, offering her a drink which she declined. I had no idea, she continued, her voice barely above a whisper, about Aurora, about the company's financial troubles, about any of it. Richard never tells me about business matters. I sat across from her. I know, Aunt Martha. Why didn't you tell me? All these years while they were— She trailed off, unable to finish. Would it have made a difference? I asked gently. Would you have stood up to Uncle Richard? She looked down at her hands. I always thought I was protecting you by smoothing things over, making excuses for Richard, for the boys, telling myself that one day they'd see what a remarkable person you are. She looked up, tears in her eyes. I was a coward. Something in my heart softened. Aunt Martha had been caught between loyalty to her husband and care for me. She hadn't handled it well, but she'd been the only one who'd shown me any consistent kindness. You were the only one who remembered my birthdays, I said, who came to my graduation. Who called to check on me after I moved out? She reached across and took my hand. I've always loved you, Iris. From the moment your mother died. My best friend since childhood. I promised I would care for you. I failed in so many ways, but never in loving you. I squeezed her hand. I know. We sat in silence for a moment before she spoke again. Richard is devastated. Not just about the money, but about the public embarrassment. James hasn't stopped shouting since the news broke. Tyler is talking about legal action. They don't have grounds, I said. Simon made sure of that. I'm not here to fight their battles, she said firmly, surprising me. I'm here to ask what happens next. To you, to the company, to our family, whatever that means now. I hadn't expected this question. In my focus on revealing the truth, I hadn't thought much beyond this moment of vindication. I don't know, I admitted. The company will struggle without Aurora's backing. They might find other investors, or they might have to scale back operations significantly. And what about you? Will you— She hesitated. Will you still come to family gatherings? I laughed softly at the absurdity of the question. Aunt Martha, I don't think I'll be receiving any invitations after today. You will from me, she said with sudden determination. I'm done with the silence, with the pretending. If Richard can't accept you as family after all this, then perhaps it's time I reconsider what family means to me as well. I stared at her, seeing a strength I'd never noticed before. Are you saying— I'm saying that I've enabled this situation for too long. Your mother would be ashamed of me. She straightened her shoulders. Things will change, one way or another. Before I could respond, my phone rang again. I would have ignored it, but the caller ID showed Simon's name. Excuse me, I need to take this, I said, stepping away. Simon, what's happened? The Miller contract representatives are trying to reach you, he said. Not Richard, not Kingsley Construction. You specifically. They saw the news and want to discuss working directly with Aurora. That's unexpected, I said, glancing at Aunt Martha. There's more, Simon continued. The board of Kingsley Construction has called an emergency meeting for tomorrow morning. They're considering removing Richard as CEO. I ended the call and turned back to Aunt Martha, who was looking at me expectantly. The board might remove Uncle Richard, I said, not bothering to hide the news. She nodded slowly. He's been losing their confidence for years. This might be the final straw. She paused. What will you do if they offer you his position? The question hit me like a thunderbolt. It hadn't occurred to me that this might be the outcome, that I could end up running the very company that had rejected me for so long. I don't know, I answered honestly. That's not why I did this. Why did you do it, Iris? She asked. Was it revenge? I considered the question carefully. Not exactly. Revenge would have been letting the company fail 3 years ago when I first discovered their financial troubles. This was about— I searched for the right words. About finally being seen. About not letting them continue to benefit from my work while denying my worth. Aunt Martha stood up and approached me. For what it's worth, I've always seen you. I just didn't have the courage to make others see you too. She embraced me tightly. Whatever you decide about the company, about the family, I'm on your side now, openly. As she left, I returned to my window, looking out at the city lights. Tomorrow would bring difficult decisions, confrontations, and possibly opportunities I had never imagined. For the first time in my life, I would face the Kingsley family not as an outsider seeking acceptance, but as a force they had to reckon with. Whether I chose to take control of Kingsley Construction or walk away entirely, the choice would be mine. And that, perhaps, was the greatest victory of all. The board meeting was scheduled for 9 a.m. I received the official invitation at 7, after Simon negotiated my attendance as the representative of Aurora Investments, still technically a significant shareholder until all financial ties were formally severed. I arrived at Kingsley headquarters early, deliberately bypassing the executive floor where Uncle Richard would be preparing. Instead, I went directly to the boardroom, wanting to be settled when others arrived. The massive oak table, imported from England during my grandfather's tenure, gleamed under recessed lighting. I chose a seat halfway down, not presumptuous enough to take a position at either end, but not relegating myself to a corner either. Board members began filtering in around 8:45. Many I recognized from my appearances as Ms. K, though they now looked at me with new eyes. Some curious, some calculating, some openly impressed. A few nodded respectfully. None spoke directly to me, instead huddling in small groups, their whispered conversations stopping whenever I glanced their way. At 8:55, Uncle Richard entered with James and the company's legal counsel. He faltered momentarily when he saw me, then squared his shoulders and continued to the head of the table. James took the seat directly to his right, pointedly avoiding eye contact with me. "I see Ms. Kingsley has invited herself," Richard said, his voice carrying across the room. "Actually," said Howard Blackwell, the board chairman, "I invited her, as Aurora Investments still holds significant stake in this company until the withdrawal is finalized. Ms. Kingsley has every right to be present for discussions about the company's future." Uncle Richard's jaw tightened, but he said nothing further as the remaining board members took their seats. At precisely 9 a.m., Howard called the meeting to order. "Given the extraordinary circumstances that have come to light, this emergency session will address 3 key issues," Howard began. "First, the immediate financial situation following Aurora's withdrawal. Second, the leadership and direction of Kingsley Construction moving forward. And third, our response to the Miller contract situation." For the next hour, the company's CFO detailed the dire financial situation. Without Aurora's backing, Kingsley Construction would struggle to meet its current obligations, let alone take on new projects. The Miller contract, potentially worth $350 million over 5 years, was now in serious jeopardy. Throughout the presentation, I remained silent, watching the board members' expressions shift from concern to alarm. Uncle Richard grew increasingly agitated, interrupting with defenses and explanations that sounded hollow even to my ears. "The bottom line," the CFO concluded, "is that without immediate alternative financing, we face potential layoffs, project cancellations, and significant downsizing within 60 days. A heavy silence fell over the room. Howard turned to me. "Ms. Kingsley, would you care to address the board regarding Aurora's position?" All eyes turned to me. I took a measured breath before speaking. "Aurora Investments' withdrawal stands," I said calmly. "However, I'm willing to discuss new terms under the right conditions." Murmurs spread around the table. Uncle Richard leaned forward. "What conditions?" he asked, suspicion evident in his tone. I met his gaze directly. "Complete leadership restructuring, new governance protocols, and formal recognition of past failures, both financial and personal." "You're holding the company hostage for an apology?" James interjected incredulously. "I'm establishing terms for potential reinvestment," I corrected him. "Aurora acts in the best interest of its investors. Right now, Kingsley Construction under its current leadership represents a poor investment opportunity." Howard nodded thoughtfully. "Which brings us to our second agenda item, leadership moving forward." He looked around the table. "Given recent revelations, the board must consider whether the current executive structure serves the company's best interests." Uncle Richard stood abruptly. "This is outrageous. My father built this company. I've led it for 20 years. One setback doesn't erase that legacy." "One setback?" Howard raised an eyebrow. "Richard, let's be frank. The company was heading for bankruptcy before Aurora stepped in. The board wasn't fully informed of the severity of our financial situation. You presented the turnaround as your strategy, when in fact," he gestured toward me, "it appears the architect of our recovery was Ms. Kingsley all along." "You don't understand," Richard insisted. "The construction industry has faced unprecedented challenges, which Westmark Construction and BD Associates navigated successfully," interrupted Margaret Chen, another board member. "Our competitors have grown while we've merely survived. And now we discover it took secret intervention from a family member you've repeatedly sidelined to achieve even that." The discussion descended into a heated debate about Richard's leadership. I remained silent, letting the board work through their concerns without my input. This wasn't about me pushing Richard out. It was about the board recognizing the truth for themselves. After nearly an hour of increasingly pointed criticism, Howard called for order. "I believe we need to vote on a leadership change," he announced. "Before we do, Ms. Kingsley, I have a question for you." I nodded for him to continue. "If the board were to remove Richard as CEO, would you consider taking the position?" The room fell silent. I felt all eyes on me, including Uncle Richard's shocked stare. "No," I said firmly. Surprised murmurs filled the room. "May I ask why not?" Howard pressed. "You've demonstrated remarkable business acumen. You know our operations intimately. You clearly care about the company's success." I took a moment to organize my thoughts. 3 reasons. First, my primary responsibility is to Aurora Investments and its clients. Second, while I believe in Kingsley Construction's potential, I don't believe I'm the right person to lead its day-to-day operations. I paused. And third, I think it would be a mistake to keep leadership exclusively within the family, any part of the family, given recent history. Howard nodded slowly. "What would you suggest instead?" "A professional CEO with proven experience in modernizing traditional construction companies. Someone without family entanglements who can make decisions based solely on business merit." I glanced at Uncle Richard. "With a restructured board that includes family representation, but not family control." The discussion shifted to potential candidates and restructuring options. Throughout it all, Uncle Richard sat silently, his expression unreadable. James alternated between whispering urgently to his father and glaring at me across the table. Finally, after 3 hours of deliberation, the board voted 7-2 to remove Richard as CEO and begin a search for an external replacement. They also voted to offer me a board position as a representative of both Aurora Investments and the Kingsley family. As the meeting adjourned, people filed out quickly, leaving me alone with Uncle Richard and James. The tension in the room was palpable. "Are you satisfied now?" Richard asked, his voice low and dangerous. "You've destroyed everything I've built." "No, Uncle Richard," I replied, gathering my papers. "I've prevented the destruction of everything your father built. There's a difference." "This isn't over," James warned, stepping toward me. "The family won't stand for this humiliation." I stood my ground. "The family has choices to make, just as I did. They can continue living in denial, or they can acknowledge reality and move forward." I headed toward the door, then paused. "By the way, the Miller representatives are meeting with me this afternoon. I'll recommend they continue working with Kingsley Construction under its new leadership, if that's what the board decides is best." As I walked out, leaving them stunned behind me, I felt neither triumph nor regret, only a profound sense that after years of being defined by others, I was finally writing my own story. The weeks following the board meeting were a whirlwind of activity. True to my word, I met with the Miller contract representatives and convinced them to maintain their relationship with Kingsley Construction, contingent on the leadership changes and Aurora's continued involvement as an advisor. The news stabilized the company's immediate future, preventing the mass exodus of employees that had seemed imminent. The board moved quickly to appoint Patricia Winters, a respected industry veteran, as interim CEO while conducting a formal search. I accepted the board position, but maintained professional distance, attending meetings virtually when possible and focusing primarily on ensuring a smooth financial transition. Uncle Richard retreated to his vacation home in Maine, refusing all contact with the board or family. James initially threatened legal action, but quieted after the company lawyers explained that his case had no merit. Tyler and Veronica, sensing the shifting power dynamics, began reaching out to me with awkward overtures of familial reconciliation. It was Aunt Martha, though, who truly surprised me. After our conversation in my apartment, she had returned home, packed several suitcases, and checked into a hotel. "I needed time to think," she explained when she called me a few days later. "About Richard, about our marriage, about the kind of person I've allowed myself to become." We began meeting weekly for lunch, something we'd never done before. During these meetings, she shared stories about my mother that I'd never heard, filling in pieces of my history that had been withheld from me. She was the brave one, Aunt Martha told me during one lunch. Your mother never cared about the Kingsley name or fortune. She married your father, a brilliant architect with no family connections, despite Richard and their father objecting to the match. They were so happy together, Iris. When they died, Richard saw taking you in as an obligation, not a privilege. I should have fought harder for you. You're fighting now, I said, reaching across the table to squeeze her hand. That counts for something. 3 weeks after the board meeting, Patricia Winters called to request an in-person meeting at her temporary office, formerly Uncle Richard's. When I arrived, I found not only Patricia, but also Howard and 2 other board members waiting. Iris, thank you for coming, Patricia began once we were settled. We've been reviewing the company's situation from every angle, and we've come to some conclusions we'd like to discuss with you. For the next hour, they outlined their assessment of Kingsley Construction's strengths, weaknesses, and potential. Their analysis largely matched my own, with one significant addition. They believed the company's future success depended heavily on technological innovation and modernization, precisely the areas where my expertise lay. We'd like to propose a formal partnership between Kingsley Construction and Aurora Investments, Howard explained. Not just as a financial backer, but as a strategic technology partner. We believe your architectural software could revolutionize our project management and give us a competitive edge in the industry. I listened carefully, asking pointed questions about implementation, resource allocation, and expected outcomes. The proposal was sound from a business perspective, but I couldn't ignore the personal implications of remaining so closely tied to the Kingsley name. I appreciate the offer, I said finally, but I need to be clear about something. If we proceed, this will be a strictly professional relationship. My technology for your infrastructure. No appeals to family loyalty, no leveraging of personal connections. Patricia nodded firmly. Absolutely. This proposal is based entirely on mutual business benefit. Your family connection is irrelevant to our decision. Those words, your family connection is irrelevant, struck me with unexpected force. For years, I had been told that my family connection was the only thing that mattered, and simultaneously that it wasn't real enough to count. Now, finally, I was being valued for my actual contributions, not my blood relation or lack thereof. I'll have my team review the details and get back to you by the end of the week, I promised. As I prepared to leave, Howard asked if he could speak with me privately. Once the others had left, he closed the door and turned to me with a serious expression. There's something else you should know, Iris. Richard has been calling board members, trying to rally support for his reinstatement. I wasn't surprised. Has he found any takers? Not among the board, but he's been speaking to major clients, suppliers, even some of our project managers, anyone with influence who might pressure us to bring him back. Howard sighed. He's also spreading rumors about you, suggesting your actions were motivated by personal vendetta rather than business sense. Again, not surprising, I said, though the news stung more than I wanted to admit. The reason I'm telling you this, Howard continued, is that the annual Kingsley Foundation Charity Gala is next month. Traditionally, the CEO gives the keynote address and announces the foundation's major initiatives for the coming year. I saw where this was heading. And you're concerned about Richard using the event as a platform to undermine the transition. Howard nodded. Exactly. The foundation board is separate from the company board, and Richard still chairs it. It's one of the few public forums where he maintains control. The Kingsley Foundation had been established by my grandfather to support affordable housing initiatives. Despite my exclusion from the company, I had always respected the foundation's work and even anonymously donated to several of its projects through Aurora. What are you suggesting? I asked, though I already suspected his answer. We'd like you to attend the gala. Your presence alone would send a powerful message that the changes at Kingsley Construction have the family's support, or at least part of the family's support. I considered the request carefully. Attending would mean facing not just Uncle Richard and my cousins, but the entire extended Kingsley network. Aunts, uncles, cousins, and family friends who had witnessed my marginalization for years. It would mean subjecting myself to whispers, stares, and likely some direct confrontations. "I'll think about it," I said finally, not committing either way. The following weekend, Aunt Martha invited me to brunch at her new apartment, a modern one-bedroom she'd rented after deciding not to return to the house she'd shared with Uncle Richard. "He's not taking it well," she said as she poured coffee. "The separation, the company changes, any of it. He's convinced himself you orchestrated everything specifically to hurt him." "That's not surprising," I replied. "Uncle Richard has always seen himself at the center of every story." Aunt Martha smiled sadly. I enabled that perspective for too long. She hesitated before continuing. "He called me yesterday. He wants me to convince you not to attend the gala." I raised an eyebrow. "So Howard was right. Uncle Richard is worried about my presence there." "He's worried about appearances," she confirmed. "About losing face in front of the foundation donors and community partners." "And what do you think I should do?" Aunt Martha looked me directly in the eyes. "I think you should do whatever feels right for you, Iris. Not for Richard, not for the company, not even for me. For once in this family, someone should make a decision based on what they truly want, not what maintains appearances." Her words stayed with me as I weighed my options throughout the week. By Friday, I had made my decision and called Howard to inform him. "I'll attend the gala," I said, "but on one condition. I want to announce a new Aurora Investments initiative, a technology scholarship for foster children and adoptees interested in construction or architecture. And I want it named after my birth parents." Howard agreed immediately. That evening, I received the official invitation to the Kingsley Foundation Annual Gala. As I traced my fingers over the embossed lettering, I realized it was the first time my name had ever appeared on Kingsley Foundation letterhead. Ms. Iris Kingsley, CEO, Aurora Investments. For the first time since this all began, I allowed myself to feel a small measure of pride. Not in the vindication or the business success, but in the simple fact that I had finally claimed my space in a world that had tried to convince me I didn't belong. The gala was 2 weeks away. I had no illusions that it would be anything but tense and challenging. Uncle Richard would undoubtedly make his displeasure known. My cousins would likely oscillate between hostility and false friendliness, and the extended family would watch the drama unfold with barely concealed fascination. But for the first time in my life, I wasn't dreading a Kingsley family event. I was prepared for it. More than that, I was looking forward to it. Not with malice or thoughts of revenge, but with the calm assurance of someone who finally knew her own worth. As I placed the invitation on my desk, my phone rang. It was Simon. "Just checking in," he said. "How are you holding up with all of this?" I thought about the question for a moment. Better than I expected. It feels like I've been holding my breath for years, and I'm finally learning how to breathe normally. "Good," he said. "You deserve that. By the way, the final paperwork for the Aurora Kingsley partnership came through for review. Want me to bring it by tomorrow?" "Yes, please," I replied. "And Simon, thank you for everything." After we hung up, I walked to my window and looked out at the city lights. Somewhere in those lights was the building my grandfather had built, the foundation he had created, and the family that had struggled to accept me. For better or worse, their story was intertwined with mine. But for the first time, I wasn't just a footnote in the Kingsley family saga. I was writing my own chapter, on my own terms. And that made all the difference. The night of the gala arrived crisp and clear. I chose my outfit carefully. A midnight blue gown, elegant but not ostentatious, paired with my mother's pearl earrings and a simple diamond bracelet that had been my first major purchase after selling my company. Professional makeup and an updo completed the look. The woman who stared back at me from the mirror looked confident, successful, and completely at ease, even if I didn't quite feel that way inside. My car arrived at the Kingsley Art Museum precisely at 7:30 p.m. The museum had been one of my grandfather's passion projects, built to house his collection of architectural drawings and models alongside traditional art. The annual gala was always held in the central atrium, beneath the spectacular glass dome he had designed. As I approached the entrance, camera flashes popped. The event always attracted local media covering both the charitable work and the social aspects. This year, given the recent shakeup at Kingsley Construction, the media presence seemed doubled. Ms. Kingsley, is it true you secretly saved the company from bankruptcy? Ms. Kingsley, will you be taking over as CEO? Ms. Kingsley, how does your uncle feel about your return to the family fold? I smiled politely, but didn't respond to any of the questions, moving steadily toward the entrance where Howard waited. Quite the entrance, he commented, offering his arm to escort me inside. Richard arrived 20 minutes ago and went straight to the donor reception room. The rest of the family is scattered throughout. Thank you for the intelligence, I said with a small smile. Is Aunt Martha here yet? Yes, she's by the east display. He lowered his voice. She asked me to tell you she saved you a seat at her table, away from Richard's. I nodded gratefully. As we entered the main atrium, conversations faltered and heads turned. I recognized the quick calculations happening behind polite smiles. Who should acknowledge me? Who should pretend not to see me? Who might benefit from being seen with the newly revealed power player? For years, I had attended this event as a peripheral figure, tolerated but never truly welcomed. People had been polite but dismissive, their attention quickly shifting to more important family members. Now, those same people were maneuvering to catch my eye, raising glasses in greeting, smiling with sudden warmth. I found Aunt Martha exactly where Howard had indicated, looking elegant in a simple black dress, her usual elaborate jewelry noticeably absent. "You look beautiful," she said, embracing me. "Are you ready for this?" "As ready as I'll ever be," I replied, taking the seat beside her. Throughout dinner, a steady stream of family members, business associates, and foundation supporters stopped by our table. Some offered awkward congratulations on my success, carefully avoiding any mention of the family drama. Others were more direct, asking pointed questions about my intentions for both Aurora and Kingsley Construction. I answered each with the same measured politeness, neither encouraging gossip nor shutting down legitimate business inquiries. Noticeably absent were Uncle Richard and my cousins, who remained at their table across the room, huddled in what appeared to be intense conversation. Occasionally, I caught James or Tyler glancing in my direction, but Uncle Richard kept his back to me throughout the meal. As coffee was served, Patricia Winters stopped by our table. "The foundation director just informed me that Richard has revised the evening's agenda," she said quietly. "He's scheduled himself to speak before the foundation announcements, not after as traditionally done." Aunt Martha frowned. "That's not a good sign. Richard only changes protocols when he's planning something." "Do we know what he intends to say?" I asked. Patricia shook her head. "No, but he's been in contact with several long-time foundation donors today. Whatever it is, he's building support for it." Howard joined us, looking concerned. "The foundation director just told me Richard plans to announce a special family legacy initiative, focusing on preserving traditional values in business succession." I understood immediately. He's using the foundation to make a statement about family leadership, a direct counter to the company's decision to seek an external CEO. Howard nodded grimly. "Exactly. And in this room, filled with people who've supported the Kingsley name for generations, he'll find a receptive audience." "What should we do?" Aunt Martha asked, looking between us. I considered our options quickly. "Nothing," I decided. We let him speak. Attempting to stop him would only create a scene and potentially damage the foundation's work, which is more important than any family disagreement. Howard looked relieved at my response. "The foundation director also confirmed you're still scheduled to announce the Aurora Scholarship Initiative after the main foundation business concludes." "Good," I said. "That's all that matters." At precisely 9 p.m., the foundation director approached the podium and welcomed everyone to the annual gala. After acknowledging major donors and reviewing the past year's accomplishments, she introduced Uncle Richard. He took the stage to warm applause, looking every inch the distinguished family patriarch in his custom tuxedo. If the recent upheaval had affected him, it didn't show in his confident stance or practiced smile. "Thank you all for your continued support of the Kingsley Foundation," he began. "As many of you know, our family has faced some unusual challenges recently." A knowing murmur rippled through the crowd. "These challenges have caused me to reflect deeply on what it means to be a Kingsley, on the values my father instilled in me, and his father before him." I maintained a neutral expression, though I felt Aunt Martha tense beside me. "For 3 generations, the Kingsley name has stood for integrity, loyalty, and unwavering commitment to family," Richard continued. "In a world of constant change and shifting allegiances, these values provide an anchor, not just for our family, but for the businesses and charitable works that bear our name." He paused, scanning the room before his gaze landed deliberately on me. "That's why tonight I'm proud to announce the Kingsley Legacy Initiative. This new program will provide mentorship and support to family businesses facing succession challenges, helping them navigate the complex waters of generational transition while preserving the core values that made them successful in the first place." The implied message was clear to anyone familiar with recent events. Richard was positioning himself as the defender of family business tradition against external forces, namely, me and the board's decision to seek a non-family CEO. "The initiative will be funded by a personal contribution of $5 million from my wife and me," he continued, demonstrating our unwavering commitment to the Kingsley name and all it represents. A surprised murmur spread through the crowd. Aunt Martha looked equally shocked. Clearly, she hadn't been consulted about this joint contribution. "In closing," Richard said, his voice taking on a pointed edge, "I want to remind everyone that true legacy isn't built on quick profits or corporate maneuvering. It's built on loyalty, consistency, and putting family above all else. Values the Kingsley name has always represented and always will, regardless of temporary setbacks or misguided decisions." With that parting shot, he returned to his seat amid enthusiastic applause from much of the crowd. The foundation director retook the podium, thanking Richard for his generous contribution and heartfelt words, before continuing with the planned program. Throughout the next hour of foundation business, I sat quietly, listening attentively, but making no comment. Finally, the director announced the evening's final presentation. "We're pleased to welcome Ms. Iris Kingsley, CEO of Aurora Investments, to announce a new educational initiative." As I walked to the podium, I felt the weight of every gaze in the room. Uncle Richard's calculated speech had set the stage for confrontation, positioning himself as the defender of family tradition against my supposed betrayal. I could respond in kind, using my moment at the microphone to counter his narrative, or I could choose a different path entirely. Looking out at the sea of faces, some supportive, some curious, some openly hostile, I made my decision. "Thank you for that introduction," I began. "And thank you to everyone who supports the vital work of the Kingsley Foundation. Tonight, I'm honored to announce that Aurora Investments will be establishing the Elizabeth and David Kingsley Technology Scholarship." I paused, letting my parents' names hang in the air for a moment. For those who don't know, Elizabeth and David Kingsley were my birth parents. Elizabeth was Joseph Kingsley's daughter and Richard's sister. They died when I was 4 years old, leaving behind little except their names and a passion for combining architecture with innovative technology. The room had grown very quiet. This scholarship will provide full educational funding for young people from foster care and adoptive backgrounds who wish to pursue careers combining construction, architecture, and technology. Because everyone deserves the chance to build something lasting, regardless of their family circumstances. I looked directly at Uncle Richard for the first time that evening. My grandfather once told me that the true purpose of building isn't just creating structures that stand. It's creating foundations that allow others to rise. This scholarship is my way of honoring not just my parents' memory, but the vision my grandfather had for the Kingsley name, one of innovation, opportunity, and growth. As I returned to my seat amid thoughtful applause, I caught Aunt Martha wiping away tears. Across the room, Uncle Richard sat stone-faced, his earlier triumph visibly diminished. Beside him, I noticed James watching me with an expression I couldn't quite read, something between resentment and reluctant respect. The formal program concluded shortly after, transitioning to the social portion of the evening. As people mingled and the orchestra began playing, I found myself approached by a steady stream of guests offering congratulations on the scholarship and, in many cases, more candid comments about the company situation than they'd dared express earlier. I was speaking with a longtime foundation donor when I felt a presence at my elbow. Turning, I found James standing there, looking uncomfortable but determined. "May I speak with you privately?" he asked, his tone carefully neutral. Excusing myself from the conversation, I followed him to a quieter corner of the room. "That was well played," he said without preamble. "The scholarship announcement. You managed to align yourself with Grandpa's legacy while making Dad look petty. Very strategic." "It wasn't strategy, James," I replied evenly. "It was honoring my parents and creating opportunities for young people in similar situations." He studied me for a moment. "Maybe it can be both." He shifted his weight, clearly struggling with whatever he'd come to say. "Dad won't ever admit he was wrong about you, about any of this. I know. And I'm not here to apologize for him, or even for myself, really." He took a deep breath. "But I am here to talk about the future, about what happens next with the company. That's up to the board and the new CEO when they're appointed," I said. "We both know you'll influence that decision considerably." He lowered his voice. "What do you want, Iris? Revenge? Control? To push all of us out?" I considered the question seriously. "What I want is for Kingsley Construction to thrive, to honor your grandfather's vision while adapting to a changing industry. I want the company to be something we can all be proud of, not a battleground for family resentments." "And what about us? The family?" "That's a separate question," I said, "and one that will take more than a conversation at a gala to answer." James nodded slowly. "Fair enough." He glanced across the room to where his father was speaking intensely with a group of older donors. "For what it's worth, Tyler and I have been talking. We think there might be a way forward that works for everyone, if you're willing to discuss it." I raised an eyebrow. "I'm listening." "Not tonight," he said, "but soon. We'll be in touch." As he walked away, Aunt Martha approached, linking her arm through mine. "What did James want?" she asked. "To begin a conversation," I replied. "I'm not sure where it leads yet." She smiled. "That's progress, at least." As we made our way toward the exit, I caught Uncle Richard watching me from across the room. For a brief moment, our eyes met. His filled with a complex mixture of anger, pride, and something that might have been regret. Then he deliberately turned away, ending the connection as quickly as it had formed. Outside, the night air was cool and refreshing after the crowded atrium. As I waited for my car, I looked up at the stars visible despite the city lights. "Are you okay?" Aunt Martha asked, standing beside me. I considered the question carefully. "Yes," I said finally. "I think I am." And for the first time in a very long time, it wasn't just something I was saying to end a conversation. It was the truth. 6 months passed quickly. The Kingsley Construction leadership transition proceeded more smoothly than anyone had anticipated. After an extensive search, the board appointed Elaine Cortez, a dynamic industry veteran with a strong background in both traditional construction and technological innovation, as the new CEO. Under Elaine's leadership, and with strategic guidance from Aurora Investments, the company secured the Miller contract and began implementing the modernization plan I had envisioned years ago. Quarterly profits showed steady improvement, and employee morale rebounded as the new management team demonstrated both competence and compassion. My relationship with the Kingsley family evolved in unexpected ways. James and Tyler, after several awkward initial meetings, proved surprisingly receptive to working together professionally. James eventually took on a role as Director of Client Relations, a position that utilized his interpersonal skills without giving him operational control. Tyler, who had always been more technically inclined than his father acknowledged, found his niche overseeing the implementation of Aurora's software systems. Veronica chose a different path, using her settlement from the company to start a boutique architectural firm specializing in sustainable urban housing, a move that earned my genuine respect and support. Uncle Richard remained the most significant holdout. After the gala, he resigned from the company board entirely and retreated from public view. He maintained his position as chairman of the Kingsley Foundation, but delegated most day-to-day responsibilities to the executive director. Aunt Martha, who had finalized their separation and begun divorce proceedings, reported that he spent most of his time at their main property, rarely communicating with anyone from his former life. As for Aunt Martha, she blossomed in her newfound independence. She returned to her long-abandoned career in interior design, specializing in sustainable materials that complemented Kingsley Construction's new environmental focus. We had dinner together every Sunday, gradually rebuilding the relationship that should have existed all along. The Elizabeth and David Kingsley Technology Scholarship announced at the gala had already selected its first cohort of recipients. 15 talented young people from foster and adoptive backgrounds who would receive full funding for their education in construction technology and architectural innovation. I made a point of meeting each of them personally, sharing not just professional advice, but my own experiences navigating a world that sometimes seemed determined to remind you that you didn't belong. On a crisp October morning, almost exactly 1 year after I had discovered Kingsley Construction's financial troubles and begun my anonymous intervention, I received an unexpected call from Uncle Richard's assistant. "Mr. Kingsley would like to meet with you," she said formally, "at his office at the foundation, tomorrow at 2 p.m. if you're available." I hesitated. Richard and I hadn't spoken directly since the gala. While I had moved forward with rebuilding relationships with other family members, he had remained the unresolved piece of the puzzle. "May I ask what this is regarding?" I inquired. "Mr. Kingsley didn't specify," she replied. "He only said it was a private matter." After considering for a moment, I agreed to the meeting. Whatever Richard wanted to discuss, it was time we addressed the elephant in the room that had been our non-relationship for the past year, and indeed, the past 28 years. The following afternoon, I arrived at the Kingsley Foundation offices precisely at 2 p.m. The receptionist led me directly to Richard's office, a smaller, more modest space than his former company headquarters, but still unmistakably designed to convey authority and tradition. Uncle Richard stood as I entered, looking older than I remembered. The past year had etched new lines around his eyes and mouth, and his always perfect posture showed the slightest hint of a stoop. "Iris," he said, gesturing to the chair across from his desk. "Thank you for coming." I took the offered seat, waiting for him to explain why he had summoned me after months of silence. He returned to his chair, adjusting his tie, a nervous gesture I'd rarely seen from him before. "I imagine you're wondering why I asked to see you." "The thought crossed my mind," I replied neutrally. He nodded, seeming to gather his thoughts. "I've been doing a lot of thinking this past year. About the company, about the family, about choices I've made." I remained silent, allowing him space to continue. "Martha sent me the annual report for the scholarship program," he said, indicating a folder on his desk. 15 recipients, all with impressive backgrounds and potential. "Yes," I confirmed. "They're an extraordinary group. One of them, Jamie Chen, reminds me a bit of you at that age. Brilliant, determined, unwilling to be defined by circumstances beyond her control." He tapped the folder thoughtfully. "I read her essay about growing up in the foster system, about finding purpose and creating spaces where people feel they belong." I knew Jamie's story well. Abandoned at 9, she had bounced through 7 foster homes before finding stability with a retired teacher at 14. Despite the disruption, she had maintained perfect grades and taught herself coding, eventually developing an app that helped foster children connect with supportive resources. "Jamie has remarkable potential," I agreed. "All of the recipients do." Richard nodded again. "That's what I wanted to discuss with you." He opened a drawer and removed a document, sliding it across the desk toward me. I'd like to make a personal contribution to the scholarship fund, a substantial one. I glanced at the document, a pledge form indicating a commitment of $20 million to be dispersed over 5 years. That's generous, I said carefully, unsure of his motivation. It's not generosity, he replied, a hint of his old directness returning. It's recognition of a mistake I've been making for a very long time. I waited, sensing there was more he needed to say. When your parents died, I was angry, he continued, his voice lower. Not at you, never at you. At Elizabeth. At the world. My sister had always defied family expectations, marrying David despite our father's objections, pursuing her own path instead of joining the company. He looked down at his hands. When the accident happened, part of me saw it as validation of my warnings that she was being reckless, putting her independence above family obligation. It was the most he had ever spoken to me about my parents. And then suddenly there you were, this tiny, serious child with Elizabeth's eyes, a living reminder of the sister I had failed to protect, a reminder of my own failures. He met my gaze directly. It was easier to keep you at arm's length than to face what you represented. I was a child, I said quietly. I didn't represent anything except myself. I know that now, he acknowledged. It took losing nearly everything to make me see it. But by then, the damage was done. We sat in silence for a moment, the weight of decades of misunderstanding and hurt filling the space between us. I'm not asking for forgiveness, Richard finally continued. I don't expect that. But I am asking for the opportunity to support something meaningful that you've created, something that helps young people who deserve better than what they've been given. I studied him carefully, looking for signs of the manipulation or calculation I had grown so accustomed to detecting in his words. Instead, I saw only an aging man confronting the consequences of choices made long ago. Why now? I asked. Because time provides perspective, he replied simply. And because I recently received some medical news that clarifies one's priorities rather quickly. I felt a chill at his words. What kind of medical news? The kind that makes 20-year plans irrelevant, he said with a wry smile. Don't worry, I'm not angling for sympathy. Just explaining that certain realities have a way of cutting through pride and pretense. I nodded slowly, understanding what he wasn't explicitly stating. Does Aunt Martha know? Yes, we've discussed it. Despite everything, she's been kind. He straightened some papers on his desk. Another uncharacteristic nervous gesture. I've also spoken with James and Tyler. We're working on mending those relationships as well. I'm glad to hear that, I said sincerely. Richard looked at me intently. What I'm trying to say, Iris, is that while I can't undo the past, I can at least try to support the future you're building. Not because you need my approval or my money. You've proven beyond any doubt that you don't. But because it's the right thing to do. Because it honors Elizabeth and David's memory in a way I should have done all along. I considered his words carefully. The hurt and rejection of 28 years couldn't be erased with a single conversation or financial gesture, no matter how sincere. But holding on to resentment served no purpose either. Not for me, not for him, not for the young people who would benefit from the expanded scholarship program. I accept your contribution, I said finally. On behalf of the scholarship recipients, present and future. Relief visibly washed over his features. Thank you. But I want to be clear, I continued. This doesn't instantly fix everything between us. That will take time, if it happens at all. I understand, he said quietly. I'm not asking for more than you're willing to give. I nodded, then indicated the pledge document. I'll have the foundation director draw up the formal agreement. There's one more thing, Richard said as I stood to leave. Your grandfather's journal. I found it recently while going through some old papers. He retrieved a worn leather-bound book from his desk drawer and held it out to me. The last few entries are about you, he said. About how proud he was of your interest in architecture, your questions about his designs. He wrote that you reminded him of Elizabeth, the same curiosity, the same refusal to accept limitations. I took the journal carefully, feeling its weight in my hands. "Thank you for this." As I turned to leave, Richard spoke once more. "Iris," he said, his voice slightly unsteady, "for what it's worth, Joseph was right. You are very much your mother's daughter. And that's something I should have celebrated, not resented." I didn't trust myself to respond without emotion overwhelming me, so I simply nodded and left his office. That evening, I sat on my balcony, reading my grandfather's journal by the fading autumn light. His entries about me were brief but telling. Observations of a 4-year-old examining building blocks with unusual focus, questions about why bridges didn't fall down, proclamations that I would build the tallest building ever when I grew up. The final entry, dated just weeks before his death, read, "Watched Iris with her model houses today. She has the Kingsley eye for detail, but Elizabeth's imagination. Richard worries too much about bloodlines and tradition. He doesn't see that legacy isn't about names or inheritance. It's about passing on passion and purpose. Iris has both, whether she carries the Kingsley name or not. I hope Richard realizes this before it's too late." I closed the journal as darkness fell over the city. Below me, lights illuminated buildings my grandfather had designed, streets where my parents had walked, and somewhere in the distance, the foundation that now bore their names alongside his. The path forward wasn't completely clear. Relationships fractured over decades wouldn't heal overnight. Trust, once broken, required more than apologies and good intentions to rebuild. But for the first time, I could envision a future where family might include more than just Aunt Martha. A future where the Kingsley name represented not rejection, but possibility. In the meantime, I had built something of my own, something that wasn't defined by what I lacked, but by what I had created. Something that would provide foundations for others to build upon, just as my grandfather had always intended. And in the end, that was the truest legacy of all.